The dying princess, the palace of the alien empire, was silent. Heavy with fear and sorrow, the long golden halls, once filled with music and laughter, now echoed only with whispers. At the very center of the great chamber lay the princess, pale and weak, her breath shallow like fading embers. She was the pride of her people, the hope of the empire, but now she was slipping away, and no healer could stop it. Alien healers surrounded her bed, their hands glowing with strange tools and crystals. They murmured to one another, trying spell after spell, cure after cure, but nothing worked. Every moment that passed seemed to steal another piece of her life. The royal family stood nearby, their eyes red from tears, their hearts breaking as they watched their daughter fade. The alien queen clutched the princess's hand tightly, whispering her name again and again. The king stood behind her, tall but trembling, his mighty form shaking with helplessness. He was a ruler of many systems, feared across the stars, but in this moment, he was only a father who could not protect his child. Around them, nobles and guards stood in silence, none daring to speak the truth that hovered in the air, the truth that the princess was dying, and yet, in the shadows of the chamber, stood a figure no one paid much attention to. He was not dressed in royal armor, nor in the robes of nobility. He was not one of their kind, his form smaller, his skin different, his eyes reflecting something they could not understand. He was human, a stranger brought to the palace weeks ago, dismissed as weak, ignored as unimportant. But even as the aliens lost hope, the human's gaze never left the princess. He could see the life draining from her, and something deep inside him stirred. It was not logic, it was not reason. It was something older, something instinctive. It was the feeling that he could not stand still while another life faded before his eyes. The healers finally lowered their hands, their glowing tools dimming. They turned to the king and queen, bowing their heads in sorrow. One of them spoke, his voice heavy. "We have done all that we can. Your daughter cannot be saved." The words were like knives, cutting through the hearts of everyone in the room. The queen screamed in grief, falling beside her daughter's bed. The king clenched his fists, his roar of pain shaking the walls of the chamber. Nobles wept quietly. Guards looked away, unable to bear the sight of their rulers breaking. The empire itself seemed to tremble with despair, but the human took a step forward. His heart beating fast, eyes turned to him, surprised, some even angry that he dared to move. A guard raised his spear, blocking his path. "Stay back, human, this is not for you." The human shook his head, his voice calm but firm. "I cannot stay back. Let me try." The king turned, his eyes burning with rage and grief. "You, a human, think you can do what our best healers cannot," he thundered. But even as he spoke, his voice cracked, because deep inside he knew he had no choices left. The queen lifted her tear-stained face, her voice breaking. "What can you do? You are not of us. You have no power." The human did not argue. He simply placed his hand over his chest. "I don't know why, but I feel something. Something telling me to try. Please give me a chance." His words echoed in the chamber, soft but strong, carrying a weight that made the air still. The guards hesitated, unsure. The nobles whispered in disbelief. The king looked at his dying daughter, then at the desperate queen. Finally, with a voice like thunder breaking, he said, "If you fail, you will pay with your life." "Human." The human nodded without fear, his eyes locked on the princess. Slowly, step by step, he walked closer to her bed. The queen held her daughter tighter, tears streaming down her face. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "If there is even a chance, then let him try." The king closed his eyes, his shoulders heavy with sorrow, and gave the smallest nod. The guards lowered their weapons, though their eyes burned with distrust. The human knelt beside the princess, his heart racing. He reached out slowly, his hand hovering just above her cold skin. The royal family watched, their breaths caught in their throats. The entire court leaned forward, the air thick with silence and fear, for in that moment, between life and death, hope and despair, one human dared to reach for an alien princess, and the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. The royal court in shock, the chamber was silent, but the silence was sharp like a blade. Every eye in the great hall followed the human as his hand hovered above the princess. No one spoke, no one moved, as if the whole palace feared that even a breath could break the fragile moment. The queen's tears fell on the princess's face, shining like silver under the pale light. She whispered her daughter's name again and again, as if holding her to this world by the strength of her love alone. The king stood tall, but his hands shook at his sides, torn between rage and hope. Guards gripped their weapons, shifting uneasily, ready to strike if the human did anything strange. The human felt the weight of 100 stares pressing down on him. He knew he was out of place, a stranger among beings who saw themselves as greater than him, but he also knew something deep inside, something pulling him forward. His heart whispered that he was meant to be here, meant to try, meant to touch the dying princess. "Do not touch her," one of the nobles suddenly shouted. His voice breaking the stillness, gasps followed as others agreed. "It is forbidden," another cried. "He is not one of us. He cannot touch royal blood." The human froze for a moment. His hand trembling in the air, the queen turned her head sharply, her voice desperate. "Silence, all of you. We have no choice." The noble stepped forward, his long robe dragging across the marble floor, his face red with anger. "If you allow this, my queen, our laws mean nothing. Our empire will be shamed before the stars," the king's deep voice thundered, shaking the walls. "Enough, do you not see? She is dying. Your laws are nothing if my daughter is gone." The noble stepped back, his face pale now, but his eyes still burning with fear of the unknown. The human lowered his gaze, but his hand did not move away. His voice was quiet yet steady. "I do not ask to break your laws. I ask only to try. If I fail, then nothing changes. She will still be gone, but if I succeed, you will have her back." The words hung in the air like a challenge, raw and unpolished, yet filled with a strange power. Even the guards who distrusted him felt the truth in those simple lines. The queen's lips trembled as she whispered, "Then do it." Her hands shook as she lifted her daughter's head slightly. Placing her closer to the human's reach, the king watched, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, his rage now drowned by sorrow. Finally, he gave one sharp nod, his voice heavy. "Try, human, but if this is a trick, you will not leave this palace alive." The human nodded, his jaw set, and slowly lowered his hand until his skin touched the princess's cold forehead. A shiver ran through him like touching ice that burned. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The princess lay still, her face pale, her body weak. The court leaned forward, their breaths held, some with hope, others with doubt. Then it began. A faint glow spread under the human's hand. Soft at first, almost like a trick of the light. The princess's chest rose slightly, a stronger breath than before. The glow spread across her skin, her face warming with color, her lips trembling as if she were fighting to speak. Gasps filled the chamber. The queen covered her mouth in shock. Tears streaming anew, the king's eyes widened, his body stiff as if he had been struck. The nobles stumbled backward, some whispering prayers, others shaking their heads. The guards gripped their weapons tighter, not in anger now, but in fear of what they were seeing. "She breathes," the queen cried, falling to her knees beside the bed, clutching her daughter's hand. "She lives," whispered one of the healers, his voice shaking. "This cannot be. This should not be possible." The noble who had shouted earlier dropped to his knees, his pride forgotten, his eyes wide with disbelief. The king's voice broke the chaos, deep and trembling. "What are you? Human?" The human did not answer, his hand still resting gently against the princess's skin. He was as shocked as they were, his heart racing. But he could feel something flow through him. It was not strength, it was not power. It was something different, like life itself. The princess's breathing grew stronger, her chest rising with each breath. Her skin glowing with warmth, the queen wept openly, clutching her daughter and looking at the human with eyes full of both fear and gratitude. The king's fists clenched, his mighty form trembling not with anger now, but with the weight of the impossible. The entire royal court stood frozen, caught between terror and awe. The silence of disbelief filled the chamber once more, but it was no longer the silence of despair. It was the silence of a miracle. And in that silence, the galaxy's balance shifted. For in that moment, an alien empire saw with its own eyes what a single human touch could do. The touch of life. The glow spread slowly, like fire waking inside fading embers. The princess's skin, once pale as snow, began to shine with faint warmth. Her lips moved slightly, as if whispering a sound too weak for anyone to hear. The court leaned closer, hearts pounding, eyes wide, afraid to believe what they were seeing. The human's hand trembled as the strange energy flowed through him. He did not understand it, he did not control it. But he felt it. It was not magic, it was not science. It was something older, something alive, like the very essence of life was pouring through him and into her. The queen cried out her daughter's name, her tears falling fast. She clutched the princess's hand and felt warmth returning to it. Her sobs filled the chamber, not of sorrow now, but of desperate hope. The king stepped closer, his mighty frame bending down. His eyes locked on the human's hand. "She is breathing," whispered one of the guards, his voice shaking. "No, this cannot be real," said a noble. Clutching his chest in fear, the healers stared at their own useless tools. Ashamed and confused, they had tried everything. Their arts had failed. Yet a single touch from a human was doing what they could not. The human's breath grew heavy. As if the act was draining him, sweat rolled down his face. But he refused to move his hand. His heart beat faster. Every thump like thunder in his chest, yet still he pressed on. Whispering softly, though he did not know why. "Come back, fight, don't leave them," he said, his voice trembling. The princess's chest rose higher, stronger, her faint breaths turning steady. Her eyelids fluttered. Her fingers twitched against her mother's grip. The court gasped, the sound filling the chamber like a wave. "She moves," shouted a young guard. Unable to hold his voice, the queen leaned close, whispering into her daughter's ear, "Stay with me, my star. Stay with me." The king's mighty hand shook as he gripped the bed frame. His jaw tight, even he feared across the stars. Could not stop the tears that touched his eyes. The glow under the human's hand grew brighter, a soft golden light that wrapped the princess in warmth. It was not the cold light of machines, not the sharp glow of alien power. It was gentle, alive, like sunlight breaking into a dark room. Even those who doubted could not deny the truth before their eyes. The princess's lips parted, a weak sound escaping. The queen cried out in shock, "She speaks! She speaks!" Her voice was soft, broken but clear enough for all to hear. She whispered one word, simple but full of life. "Mother!" The chamber erupted, cries and shouts echoing through the golden walls. Some nobles fell to their knees. Others covered their mouths in disbelief. The healers stumbled backward, unable to explain, unable to deny. The guards lowered their weapons, no longer ready to strike the human. But watching him with awe and fear, the king stepped forward, his shadow falling over both the human and the princess. His deep voice shook as he whispered, "She was gone, I saw it, I felt it, but now—" "She lives?" The queen turned to him, clutching the princess, her face shining with tears. "It is him, it is the human, he saved her." The king's gaze burned into the human, searching, questioning, demanding answers without words. But the human only shook his head weakly, his voice low. "I do not know how. I only knew I had to try." The energy inside him flickered, fading, leaving him tired but steady. He pulled his hand away slowly and the glow dimmed. Yet the princess kept breathing, her color returned, her eyes fluttering as she fought to awaken. The queen sobbed into her daughter's chest, whispering thanks again and again. The king placed a hand over his face, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Around them the court was chaos, voices rising, fear and wonder mixing in every whisper. "Is he chosen?" someone asked. "Is this the prophecy?" another murmured. The noble who had spoken against the human earlier fell silent. His pride gone, he looked at the human as if seeing him for the first time. Not as weak, not as lesser, but as something dangerous. The healers bowed their heads ashamed, powerless before what they had just witnessed. Even the guards stepped back, uncertain if their weapons would mean anything against such a force. The human sat back on his knees, his chest heaving, his eyes still fixed on the princess. She was alive, he knew it. Not only because he saw her breathing, but because he felt it. Some strange bond now tied them, invisible but strong, and in that moment he realized his life had changed forever. The royal family clung to the princess. The court erupted in disbelief. And across the galaxy, though they did not yet know it, empires would one day tremble at the story that began here, for the touch of a single human had brought life where death had claimed its hold, and nothing would ever be the same again. Whispers of power. The chamber was still shaking with voices, but beneath the noise, whispers began to spread like fire in dry grass. The alien nobles huddled together, their jeweled robes brushing the marble floor as they leaned close. They did not speak loudly for fear of the king and queen, but their eyes darted again and again toward the human. Every whisper carried fear, wonder, and something darker. Envy. "How is this possible?" muttered one noble, his voice low and sharp. A human, a simple creature from a forgotten world. Touching our princess and bringing her back, another said. One more leaned in, his face pale. What if this is no accident? What if humanity hides a power greater than our empire? Their words blended into the air, mixing doubt and terror. The healers stood apart, heads bowed, their glowing tools useless in their hands. They felt shame burn through them, their pride shattered. For years they were called miracle workers, masters of science and spirit. But now in one moment a stranger had undone them. The queen did not care for whispers or shame. She clutched her daughter close. Her eyes shone with gratitude and fear as she stared at the human. Her voice cracked when she spoke. You saved her, I do not know how, but you saved her. Her tears fell like stars upon the princess's pale gown. The king's face was harder to read, his eyes narrow, his jaw clenched. He looked at the human not with hate but with heavy suspicion. Who are you really? The king's voice rumbled like thunder rolling across a battlefield. What are you hiding, for no human should be able to do this? The human shook his head, his breath still heavy from the strange act. I am no one, he said quietly. I am only human. I only felt I had to try. The words were plain, but they carried weight. They echoed in the ears of everyone present. Refusing to be dismissed, the princess stirred again, her eyes opening wider than before. She looked weak, fragile, yet her gaze was clear. Her lips formed soft words, her voice a trembling whisper. I saw light, I felt warmth. And I heard him. Her gaze fell on the human. And the court gasped again. The queen's tears doubled, her hands pressing against her daughter's cheeks. You live, my star, you live, she cried. The king stepped forward, his mighty hand resting gently on the princess's forehead. He closed his eyes for a moment, his chest shaking with silent relief. But behind the family's joy, the whispers only grew stronger. Some nobles bowed their heads in awe, calling the human blessed. Others clenched their fists, their eyes hard, fearing what this would mean for the empire. If a human could heal what all their knowledge could not, what else might humanity be capable of? One noble, older and sharper than the rest, spoke in a low hiss. Do you not remember the prophecy? The words of the ancients, the stranger who would come from the stars, bringing life to the dying air. The other nobles froze, their blood running cold. Few spoke of the old prophecies, dismissing them as myths, but now none could deny what they had just seen. The human did not know of their whispers. He only stared at the princess, her hand lifted weakly, trembling in the air until it touched his own. The court gasped again. The queen's tears fell harder. The king's eyes narrowed. The bond was clear, undeniable, and it frightened as much as it amazed. Why does she reach for him? A guard muttered under his breath. She should be clinging to her family. Not to him, another replied, but no one could break the moment. No one could separate her hand from his. It was as if an invisible thread had been woven between their hearts. The king finally spoke, his voice deep and heavy with command. Take him to the council chamber, he will answer for this. And the truth of his power will be known. The guards hesitated, unsure if they should touch the human who had just performed a miracle. But the king's eyes burned with authority, and they moved forward, spears in hand. The queen looked up sharply, her voice breaking. No, do not harm him. He saved her. The king did not turn to her, but his tone was firm. And because of that, we must know what he is. What danger he brings to us, the nobles whispered louder now. Some agreeing, some protesting. The court was divided, but all were bound together by fear of the unknown. The human rose slowly, his strength weak but his gaze steady. He did not resist as the guards closed around him. His eyes lingered on the princess, who tried to call out weakly, her voice breaking. Wait, do not take him away. But the king raised his hand, and silence fell over the chamber once more. The miracle had saved the princess, but it had also planted a seed of fear, a seed of suspicion, a seed that would grow into something greater than anyone could control. The court whispered of power, of prophecy, of humanity's hidden strength, and in those whispers, the future of empires began to shift. The princess awakens. The chamber was filled with tension as the guards surrounded the human. Their spears glimmered in the dim light, their steps heavy as they moved closer. The nobles whispered eagerly. Torn between fear and curiosity, the queen held her daughter, her heart refusing to let go of the miracle she had just witnessed. Then a sound broke through the whispers, soft but clear. Wait, the princess said, her voice weak but steady. The guards froze in place, the nobles gasped. and the queen's tears fell faster. For the first time since her sickness began, the princess had spoken with strength. The king turned sharply, his eyes wide, his body trembling with disbelief. His daughter, who only moments ago had been slipping into death, was sitting up slowly, her hair spilled across her shoulders like silver, her face pale but glowing with life. The queen placed her hands against the princess's cheeks, crying out, "You live, you truly live." The court fell into stunned silence, broken only by the princess's soft breaths. Every noble, every guard, every healer stared at her as if they were seeing a ghost. Her fingers moved, weak but purposeful, reaching once more for the human. Her eyes, though heavy with exhaustion, locked onto him with clarity. The human's chest tightened as he saw her reaching for him. He stepped forward despite the guards, his hand meeting hers in the air. The moment their skin touched, a calm spread across the princess's face. Her lips curved in the faintest of smiles, fragile but filled with life. The queen gasped, covering her mouth, her voice breaking. She chooses him. The king's face hardened. Torn between pride that his daughter lived and fear of the strange bond she had with the human, the nobles began whispering louder, their voices like wind rushing through a canyon. "Why does she cling to him?" one muttered. "What does this mean for our empire?" another asked. The princess's voice trembled as she spoke again. "I saw the light, I felt the darkness pulling me away. But then he was there, his hand pulled me back." Her words struck the chamber like thunder, shaking every soul who heard them. She was not just alive. She was testifying that the human was the reason she had returned. The queen wept openly, the king's hands trembled, and the nobles fell deeper into unease. The healers bowed their heads, ashamed, their voices breaking. "We could not save her, yet he has done what we could not." The king turned to them sharply, his voice like steel. "Silence, all of you. Your failure is not the question here. The question is what this human truly is." But even his strong voice could not erase the truth that echoed through the chamber. The princess leaned weakly against her mother, but her gaze never left the human. Her small fingers gripped his hand tighter. Refusing to let him go, her voice shook but held conviction. "Do not take him away. Without him I would not be here. He is not our enemy." The queen nodded quickly, her tear-stained face lifting toward the king. "Listen to her, my love. Listen to our daughter." The king stood silent, his broad shoulders heavy, his heart torn. His empire demanded strength, his nobles demanded answers, but his daughter demanded trust. The weight of leadership pressed on him like a mountain, and in that moment he realized no decision would come without cost. The nobles' whispers grew sharper, some filled with awe, some with fear. "If he can heal the princess, could he not also destroy?" one asked. "If humanity holds such power, what place do we have in this galaxy?" Another muttered, every word spread like poison, stirring unrest in the hearts of the court. The princess coughed softly, her voice weak but firm. "Do not fear him. I felt his heart, it is pure. He gave me life when all else failed." Her words quieted the room, her fragile voice stronger than the shouts of nobles. The queen kissed her forehead, whispering, "Rest, my star. You have spoken enough." But the princess shook her head faintly, refusing to let her voice be silenced. Her eyes turned back to the human, and in them was something no one could mistake. Not only gratitude, but connection, a bond that seemed to defy distance, culture, and blood. The queen saw it, the king saw it, and so did every noble in the chamber. The human was no longer just a stranger, he was part of the princess's fate. The king finally raised his hand, silencing the court. His voice was deep, controlled, though his eyes betrayed conflict. "Enough, the princess has spoken. She lives because of him, and for now, he remains under our protection." Gasps spread through the chamber, some relieved, others outraged, but none dared to speak against the king's command. The human bowed his head slightly, though he had no words. His hand remained in the princess's, their bond stronger than the doubts of the court. The queen leaned close to the king, whispering, "You see it, don't you? Fate has chosen him." The king said nothing, but his clenched jaw showed he could not escape the truth. And so in that vast chamber of golden walls and fearful whispers, the alien princess, once dying, sat awake and alive, her hand bound to a human's, and though her body was weak, her spirit was stronger than before, for with every breath, she proved that his touch was not chance but destiny. Tension in the palace, the miracle had brought life, but it also brought unease. The royal chamber was no longer filled with only joy. It was heavy with questions. The nobles stood in clusters, their jeweled robes brushing against the cold marble, their whispers sharp as blades. The guards shifted uneasily, their eyes flicking between the human and the princess. As if torn between respect and suspicion, the queen sat close to her daughter, her hands never leaving the princess's shoulders. Her heart was overflowing with gratitude, but her eyes were sharp, watching every noble who dared to question the human. The king stood tall at the foot of the bed, his figure casting a long shadow over the chamber. His voice had calmed the hall earlier, but even he could not silence the doubts stirring in the hearts of his court. "This cannot be ignored," whispered one noble, his voice trembling with both awe and fear. "If a human can give life with only a touch, what power do they truly hold?" said another. A third stepped forward, his voice louder. "What if this was no miracle? What if it was a trick, a hidden weapon of his kind?" The whispers turned to arguments, soft at first, then louder, echoing against the golden walls. The king raised his hand and silence fell like a storm crashing down. His voice was deep, steady, but laced with conflict. "Enough, the princess lives, and that truth cannot be denied. But we must not blind ourselves. We must learn what this means for our empire." The queen turned sharply to him, her voice breaking. "What it means is that he saved her. My love, without him we would be mourning, not hoping." The king's jaw tightened, his eyes locked on hers. "And if he can save her, then he can destroy her. Can you not see? This power may not belong to us," the princess stirred, her voice faint but strong enough to carry. "Do not speak of him as if he is danger. I felt his heart. It was not violence. It was life." Her words silenced the nobles for a moment, but fear is not easily silenced. Some bowed their heads in respect to her. Others muttered in defiance. The human stood quietly, his hand still held by the princess, his eyes lowered, saying nothing. The nobles gathered again, their voices like venom in the shadows. "If this story leaves these walls, other empires will hear. They will demand answers. They will fear humans as we now do." "Fear is power," another said sharply. "Perhaps this is not curse but weapon. Perhaps humanity is rising at last." The whispers twisted into plans, into doubts, into visions of war. The queen saw their faces and felt anger rise in her chest. "You speak of weapons and war, yet you forget this is my child's life you are playing with," she said, her voice sharp. The nobles lowered their heads, but their eyes did not soften. They were no longer thinking of only the princess, they were thinking of the galaxy. The king turned to the human, his gaze sharp as steel. "You will come before the council. You will tell us everything about yourself and your kind." The human met his gaze calmly, though his heart raced. "I have nothing to hide," he said softly. "I am only one man. I do not know how this happened." The king's lips pressed into a hard line, his doubts unchanged, but before he could speak further, the princess coughed and pulled herself up. Her voice, though weak, carried the weight of a command. "If you take him from me, then I will go with him." The chamber froze, gasps erupting from the nobles, shock flashing in the king's eyes. The queen gripped her daughter's hand, her tears fresh again. The princess's gaze did not waver, though her body trembled with weakness. "He gave me life, and I will not let him be treated as prisoner. Not while I breathe," she said. Her words struck through the chamber, bold and dangerous, a vow that none could ignore. The nobles erupted into chaos, their voices clashing like storm winds. "She defies the king for a human," one shouted. "This will destroy the balance of the empire," another warned. Others whispered more quietly, "Perhaps this is destiny. Perhaps the prophecy lives in him." The king raised both his hands and thundered, "Enough!" His voice silenced even the loudest noble, his glare sweeping the chamber. He turned to his daughter, his voice trembling. "Rest, my star, do not waste your strength on defiance." But inside his heart, the king knew her words could not be erased. The human stood silent, his chest heavy with the weight of what had just unfolded. He had not come here to challenge an empire, yet now he was at its very heart. The princess leaned against her mother, her hand still clinging to his. Her eyes burned with determination, a fire that no weakness could dim. And so the tension grew in the palace. Like a storm gathering at the horizon, the miracle had saved the princess, but it had also divided the court. Some saw hope, others saw danger, and all knew the galaxy would one day hear of this moment. For the power of one human's touch had not only healed a princess, It had shaken an empire. The miracle echoes. Across the stars, the palace did not sleep that night. Whispers spread through the golden halls, carried by servants, guards, and nobles alike. Every corner of the empire's capital buzzed with the same story. The same impossible truth: the dying princess had been saved. Not by alien healers, not by royal science, but by the hand of a human. By dawn, the news had escaped the palace walls. Messengers carried it through the city, and the city carried it into the skies. Ships left orbit whispering the tale to traders, and traders carried it to distant stars. By the time the sun rose fully, the galaxy was already stirring with disbelief. Some laughed when they first heard, dismissing it as rumor, but then confirmation came from within the palace itself. Sealed with the king's own crest, the princess lived, and her savior was not one of their kind. The empire's silence could not deny what had happened. The miracle was real, across distant systems. Alien rulers held secret councils. "What are these humans?" one demanded. "Are they healers? Are they weapons?" Another whispered in fear. If one human can give life, what else can they do? The seeds of doubt, of fear, of awe began to root in the hearts of leaders across the stars. In the palace, the king stood before his council, his face heavy with shadow. He had ordered silence, but silence could not hold back the tide. The nobles argued among themselves, voices rising like fire. "Use him," said one. "Keep him under our watch. His power belongs to us." "Destroy him," said another. "If this story grows, humanity will rise and we will fall." The council split. Torn between greed and fear, the queen sat beside her daughter, refusing to let the human be taken from them. Her voice was sharp, her eyes full of fire. "He is not a tool, he is not a weapon. He is the reason my child lives. And I will not see him treated as less." The princess, though still weak, lifted her head proudly. Her voice carried across the chamber. "Without him I would be gone. And yet you speak of chains and knives. Shame on you." Her words silenced the nobles, even those who hated the human most. For her voice was not just the voice of a girl, but of the heir to the empire. The king closed his eyes, his hands tightening against the throne. He could feel the storm gathering around them, not only in the palace but across the stars. Meanwhile, the human stood quietly, his presence simple yet impossible to ignore. He had not asked for this. He had not wished for power, but power had found him. And as he looked at the princess, alive and breathing, he knew there was no turning back. Their fates were now bound together, as tightly as the stars were bound to the night sky. Far beyond the empire's borders, other empires listened. The merchants carried the story into war zones, into pirate dens, into holy temples. Priests whispered of ancient prophecies. Soldiers murmured of new threats. Leaders feared the unknown. The story became more than a tale. It became a warning, a promise, and a spark. In the palace gardens, the princess walked slowly, her steps unsteady but determined. The human walked at her side, guards following at a distance. The queen watched from the balcony, her heart torn between pride and fear. The king stood in shadow, knowing the galaxy was changing before his eyes. "Do you regret it?" the princess asked softly, her voice carrying across the garden. The human shook his head, his voice calm. "No, if I had to choose again, I would still reach for you." Her lips curved into a small smile, her hand brushing against his. "You gave me life, and I will not forget it," she whispered. Above them, ships left the palace docks, carrying envoys, carrying soldiers, carrying whispers. Every journey spread the tale further, every whisper made it louder, and soon the galaxy was no longer asking if it was true, but what it meant and what would come next. The empire trembled with uncertainty, but also with something new. Hope for some, fear for others, and awe for all. For the touch of a single human had undone centuries of pride, and reminded the stars that humanity was not to be ignored. The princess's laughter, faint but alive, echoed through the garden that night. The human walked beside her, silent but strong, and though the palace walls held them close, the galaxy beyond those walls had already changed. For the miracle of one touch had spread across the stars, and its echo would never fade.